Hi all, this is Charlie, and I'm going to teach you within the context of the intensive, DBT Intensive, about setting up and running group skills training. So it would be ideal if you have in front of you the handouts, the PowerPoint slide handouts from this topic that you would receive in an intensive. And the first slide should say, how to lead group skills training. I'm not going to tell you what page it's on because that might vary from one intensive to another, but this is the set of slides. So how to lead group skills training, and the first slide, so I'm going to assume that you're looking at the slides. Maybe you can make sense of this even if you're not, but okay, let me get started with this now. A very critical thing to know about any mode of DBT that you're conducting, and group skills training is a mode, right? It's the mode to help people enhance their capabilities. And in every mode, the DBT has a way of organizing its targets, which helps you with what your agenda is while you're conducting that mode. So there are targets for running group skills training, and they are different than the targets you would use to run individual therapy. You may remember some of those targets are to get a commitment, to reduce life-threatening behaviors, to reduce therapy-interfering behaviors, to reduce quality of life interfering behaviors, to increase behavioral skills, etc., etc. But there's only 3 targets for running a skills group, and it's very helpful to know this because there's so many ways you could go running a group. So the target number 1 is to decrease behaviors likely to destroy therapy. That means to destroy your group. And what that means is to destroy your ability to teach the group. So it's to decrease behaviors that interfere with either your capacity as a teacher to teach or the group as a whole to learn. As you'll hear, that's different than behaviors that interfere with one's own capacity to learn in the group. We'll get to that. But this is really big-time behaviors that can really destroy a group. For instance, physical attacks in a group, obviously. Verbal attacks in a group of highly emotionally sensitive individuals, you just can't run a group if you have people criticizing, judging, and attacking each other. So those are big problem behaviors. Self-harm behaviors that take place in the context of the group, is going to ruin your group. United rebellion against the leaders. It's one thing to doubt the leaders, to question the leaders, to criticize the leaders, but a united group-wide rebellion against the leaders makes it impossible to teach very much. I'll give you another example that's a clinical example from one of the first groups I ever ran. There was a man who really wanted to be in the group, and he had a bipolar disorder, and at the beginning of the group, he was manic, hypomanic probably. And he would sit in the group, and at first, I'd say for the first 30 seconds of the group, I thought, oh, this is great having this guy in the group, because he started saying things like, oh my God, I love this group. I mean, this is the best group I've ever been in. Thank you so much for having me in this group. I really can't wait to keep going in this group. And it was like, oh good, we have an enthusiast. But he couldn't turn off his enthusiasm. And he couldn't stop interrupting people. And he had pressured speech. And he went on and on. And really, even with curbing him, redirecting him, and so on, he just kept going in a way that made it impossible to teach. So that would be an example of a group-destroying or therapy-destroying behavior in that mode, right? All right, we're going to get to therapy-interfering behaviors that are not therapy-destroying. But notice that our first target is that, which means that whatever else you're doing in the group, if one of those behaviors comes up, that becomes immediately your number 1 target priority in the group, which means you have to take care of that. And ideally take care of it effectively, compassionately, quickly, if possible, and with least deviation of the course of teaching in the group. Because target number 2, the second target, is the target you want to be doing as much as possible, ideally all the time. And it's the target of increasing skill acquisition and skill strengthening. It's teaching skills, getting people to practice skills, teaching skills, demonstrating skills, getting people to practice skills. That's what you want to be doing all the time. So that's your baseline, what you're aiming for. You only deviate from that if you're needing to address a therapy-destroying behavior, right? So that's teaching mindfulness skills, distress tolerance skills, emotion regulation skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills. And then there's the third and final target, and that is called decreasing therapy-interfering behaviors. So notice, these are the behaviors that interfere with a given individual learning in the group, but they don't destroy the group. So, for instance, coming late, for instance. You need to address it, but it isn't as high a priority as destroying the group, unless everybody is always coming late. Dissociating during group, meaning you're just kind of like out of it, out of touch, not in touch with reality, and maybe as a group leader you try to redirect that person, engage that person, ground that person in the group so they can learn. But if you can't do that during the group with a brief intervention, you kind of have to let it go, because a higher target is to teach the whole group skill acquisition and strengthening, and realize that that person is missing out. And therefore, in a complete DBT program, you would then talk to that person, and you would also inform their individual therapist so that they can talk to them in individual therapy. Notice that in individual therapy, the second highest target of all, only under life-threatening behaviors, is therapy-interfering behaviors. So that would include dissociating during group. So the individual therapist is, you might say, delegated to be on that problem. And the group therapist only briefly mentions it, redirects the person, and then stays on target number 2, skill acquisition and strengthening. Another example would just be withdrawal, somebody who doesn't talk very much, somebody who says, "I pass," when you come to them, somebody who doesn't do their homework, somebody who, one way or another, they're just pulling back. But it doesn't stop you from teaching, it doesn't stop other people from learning, but you are concerned about that person. Another one would be non-compliance with homework. Other ones that are kind of challenging to deal with, somebody's crying in the group, and therefore obviously something has happened before the group, and the person's upset, and they're crying, and they're weeping. Now there's different kinds of crying. There's the kind of crying that actually disrupts the whole group, makes it impossible to teach, impossible to learn. And then there's kind of quiet sobbing, where somebody is trying to not interfere with the whole group, but they are sad, or they are crying, and so they're sobbing like, like this, right? And that person, you may want to humanly say, "How are you? Let's talk about this. Can we help you with this?" Again, you find the right balance, but you minimally intervene. So you might acknowledge, you might validate that the person's having a difficult time, and you would then go on and teach. The bigger problem with that person is not, might not be what they do, but the other group members sometimes will say, "Oh my God, she's crying. Charlie, do something about that. How can you just keep teaching when she's crying?" And I'll say, "Guys, because, it's probably understandable that she's crying. We have limited time together, and I want to make sure and keep teaching. And I really hope she'll be able to kind of like learn from this, and I'm sure she's going to recover from this." And so I try to make the point of, we're staying on track here, we're staying on track. I try to do it with kindness, but very firm. So that's therapy-interfering behaviors, doodling. Rolling one's eyes, as long as it's at the leader and not at other group members, where it becomes a criticism. There's a lot of behaviors that go on that if you were to make them a higher priority than teaching your next thing to teach, they will grow because everyone in the group will be sitting there. Presumably you've got a lot of highly sensitive people there who've been invalidated before. And so you're going to have this grow, and people are going to start realizing, oh, the way you get Charlie's attention, the way you get Charlie to intervene, the way you get genuine support here is by doing this, 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 or this. And then it becomes something bigger, and it does gradually become harder to teach. So you really want to stay pretty disciplined about mainly ignoring these behaviors that are going on that don't destroy the group. Okay? Next slide is called leadership and co-leadership. All right? So, ideally in DBT skills groups, for lots of reasons, you want 2 leaders. Unfortunately, most financial reimbursement packages from insurance companies and even the public sector don't necessarily reimburse the amount that really supports having 2 leaders in the group. So that can become a problem. But ideally you want 2 leaders because there's different functions that these 2 leaders can serve, and they can serve them best with, and they can also, one function is supporting each other. But as it says in the slide, having 2 leaders helps to maintain balance between acceptance and change, always a preoccupation in DBT, so that if the person teaching right now is pushing everybody to change their behavior, the other leader might become aware that it's getting a little pushy and change focused, and they might sort of make an intervention that has to do with, hey guys, I just want to remind you this is very hard to do, and sort of highlighting validation and acceptance. So always you can go back and forth and have a balance if there's 2 people there and one can recognize where the other's going. If you're teaching by yourself, you sometimes don't realize for a while where you're going. Second, having 2 leaders helps to reduce therapist burnout. You're in it together, you're a team, you can look at each other. Ideally, you sit across from each other, you can make eye contact, you can make comments to each other, you can jump in support of each other, as well as in support of the patient. So it helps to reduce burnout. It's also somebody with whom you can rehash what happened in the group and prepare for the next group. Next, having 2 leaders helps to keep the group on track, moving forward. So you don't spin out and get derailed by something going on in the group that preoccupies the group leader. Instead, you've got 2 leaders, so one can keep going and the other one can try to just socially, psychologically support the people in the room, even by making eye contact or making a brief comment or something like that to validate or to support or to boost or to cheerlead, or you become sort of the social emotional support system for the group while the other person is teaching and pushing and staying on track. Having 2 leaders allows you to model a skillful relationship for the group. So you really can intervene with each other in a way that would be consistent with the principles that underlie the treatment. Being respectful of each other, being direct with each other, using self-disclosure, using some vulnerability. And it comes to teaching interpersonal skills, you can really use each other to demonstrate the use of the skills. Having 2 leaders helps to allow one leader to attend to individuals and group issues, and to help with teaching. So basically, one aspect of the role of being the second group leader is that you are assisting the first one. You can give examples of something that the other person is teaching. You can help people in the group come forth and say things. You can ask things of them. You can highlight things that have come up before with some of the group members that make sense in the current context. And you can, so you really have, as the second leader, the sort of support leader, you really are looking around, doing things with the group, doing things with individuals in the group, doing things to support the leader, to support the teaching. You have a lot of roles, and if something comes up where somebody needs to leave the room because of an intense crisis, internal crisis, and they can't stay in the room, that second leader might, if it's appropriate, to go out and try to coach that person to come back in. Okay? I'm going to have to stop now because I can only do 15 minutes, and we'll continue with